I hear on the regular these days from myself and others, I can't wake up and look at my phone without another goddamn tragedy. Another reason to be pissed off. Um, in our name, the US government is treating, you know, not limited to, but specifically these days, Latin America, South America, Latin Americans, South Americans, shamefully. It's inexcusable. And on top of that, there's wars all over the world and trafficking of humans, substances, toxic ideas. Basically, activity born of what's known in Buddhism as the three poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance. It's just everywhere. And we wake up and look at our little rectangle, and it's right in our face. And unless we've developed a really strong callousness, it's hard not to carry that. And then on top of all that, we wake up flailing in this net of karmic circumstances for ourselves. Our wounds, our traumas, our patterns, toxic relationships. This is a lot to carry. There's no positive follow-up here. I'm just pointing to the first noble truth of Buddhism, which is dukkha, or suffering. Right? Here's the Buddha, who we think of as like, oh, peaceful, happy, blissful man. But like, his main thing was, the first thing he wanted to teach people was suffering. And he didn't have a little rectangle to let him know about all of the abuse and greed, anger, ignorance that was happening around the world. So, Buddhism's thing is to lead with suffering, with a big S. That's kind of why, people, some folks say, we're not meant to have access to all this suffering. We are not built to be able to handle reading about the Uyghurs in China and the war in Venezuela and all the things that we have access to. And that might be true. We might be pushing the boundaries of our humanity. But this dukkha that the Buddha wants us to look at is like suffering with a big S. It is the suffering of the world. He's like empowering us. This practice empowers us to take it all on. Take it all on. And to open up to the possibility that suffering happening 3,000 miles south, 3,000 years ago, 3,000 miles within, it's all mine. It's all mine. And in this moment, I have the opportunity to be with it, transform it, be it, understand it, penetrate it, however you want to talk about it. So yeah, I hope this practice empowers us to go in, to that suffering with a big S. Dukkha, dukkha, dukkha. We, as bodhisattvas, have the courage to face it all in a healthy way. In a healthy way. So that's the first noble truth, right? Suffering. Whether that's just because we get old and die, or because of all the atrocities that are committed by people against people. And then the third noble truth talks about the end to suffering. There is an end to suffering. Which begs the question, Buddha, you had your enlightenment experience and alleviated the suffering of all the universe throughout space and time. Well, when the fuck does that start working? Because it doesn't look like it. Ending suffering. Come to Sweetwater Zen Center and sit in a yurt and end suffering. It's pretty ridiculous. So, I think that this end to suffering is a thing. The Heart Sutra that we chant in our morning service talks about the experience of no suffering. And it's an experience. That is an experiential phenomenon that is available to all of us. But to try to talk about that in the face of all of the harm that's being caused, in the face of my own medical problems, mental health problems, relationship problems, to talk about the end of suffering, I don't think does us much good. And so I notice, a continued effort to think about how else we can talk about this third noble truth. Because, come to Buddhism and end suffering. I don't know, that sounds like snake oil to me. So, for instance, Norman Fisher, he's part of your crew, right? The Bay Area people, Norman Fisher. He's a great writer, really wonderful Dharma teacher, and Kyoshin recommended a talk of his recently, and I checked it out, and he had an interesting interpretation of the third noble truth, which was through practice, we can develop how to suffer appropriately. That being the third noble truth, which is nice. Because, as bodhisattvas, we have to bear witness to the suffering of the world. So how to suffer with that appropriately. I think that's nice. And then earlier last year, we read that book from Reverend Lien Shutt, where she really wanted to focus on switching the word suffering to harm. So harming exists, there's a cause of harm, and there's an end to harm. That's nice, right? And harming is just like one section of suffering. Dying of old age makes people suffer, but there's no one really harming anyone. But that's a really nice framing. Let's look at how we cause harm. And putting an end to that makes sense. That, I think, is more digestible. And then, I've just been thinking about it and different ways to talk about this third noble truth. I kind of landed on this notion of through practice, we can develop how to respond to suffering. How do I respond to suffering? And to be clear, there's no Buddhist teaching that says this is the way to respond to suffering. So, as usual, I don't really have any concrete answers for us to walk away with. But it does offer a practice that can open a gateway to intimacy. I always come back to this intimacy. Intimacy with suffering, intimacy with this notion of ending, and intimacy with all the ways that we can respond to suffering. We can take it all on and carry it like a boulder with us wherever we go. Some might say that's not super healthy. I think for a little bit that has benefited me. We can do the opposite and look at all the wonderful things and things that we're grateful for, both in my own life and, I learned recently that the ozone layer is now whole and complete. We have fixed the ozone layer. Yeah, amazing. I also read that in the last 100 or so years, life expectancy has more than doubled. That's a pretty powerful stat in just 100 or so years. People living in the generally accepted definition of poverty has halved in the last 20 years. So we could do that. We could focus on the positive. That's a response. And then emanate that gratitude to everyone we come across. We can go into activism and dedicate our whole life to making the world a better place. Then, of course, that leads to burnout and disappointment. We can do the opposite and focus within and experience enlightenment, which is what some Buddhist lineages really just say, my own liberation is the liberation of the universe. And Zen and Mahayana Buddhism have their bone to pick with that view. So yeah, there's all these different ways to respond, and this practice is not here to tell you which one is right, but rather to explore and be intimate with them all. And to enter each one with not knowing, right? We keep talking about not knowing. So yeah, we all think that we find the right answer and then we hold on to that, and anyone who's not doing that thing has got it wrong. I don't know. Intimacy with our journey. So yeah, I was asking myself, how does Buddhism on the whole respond to suffering? And particularly the suffering that we're witnessing today, the suffering that's in our face, on our home turf, in our name. So yeah, just thinking about some different Buddhist responses, I just wanted to share them, and hopefully it offers something for us. So the first thing is this peace walk, which Jose sent out to the membership, and a lot of other people have just kind of seen, and it's in the zeitgeist right now. But 18 monks, is that right? 18 of them, I don't remember. A dozen or so monks decided to do a peace walk from Houston to Washington, D.C. And they started on October 26th, and it'll take them about 3 or 4 months to do it. And they're just walking for peace. They just walk from town to town, and people give them flowers, and they give other people flowers, and they just want to spread kindness. They want to spread kindness and symbolize the message of peace. So that's nice. Walking is different from overthrowing a tyrannical government. It makes me think of the Vietnamese monks who self-immolated during the Vietnam War. What effect did that have? It's interesting. Then I was reminded of this story I heard about Shariputra. Shariputra was an early disciple of the Buddha. and there's more about Shariputra, but anyway, he was considered like this major, iconic student of the Buddha himself in India. And there's a story where he's walking down the road and he sees a beggar and or some peasant villager, I forget what they say, and the villager is woefully, crying in his hands. And Shariputra stops and says, "Sir, what's wrong?" And the villager says, "Well, my child is sick. They're going to die. And the village doctor can save them, but we need a human eye for the potion." And so Shariputra says, "I am here to serve." And he scoops out his left eyeball and presents it to the beggar. And the beggar says, "Oh, God, the doctor said it has to be the right eyeball." And Shariputra says, "Well, I am here for nothing if not to serve." And he scoops out his right eyeball. He hands it to the villager, who takes it and stomps on it and squashes it with his heel and says, "What good is this squashed eyeball to me?" And then the beggar transforms into Manjushri, the great bodhisattva of wisdom, and says something along, just kind of congratulates Shariputra or something on the merit of giving without attachment to the result of what you're giving. So all of these stories are just for us to marinate with. How do I walk for peace? How do I respond to people walking for peace? How do I give with no attachment? At the end of every year, I budget a certain amount of money that I want to give away. And I have this whole big torturous process of where's the best place for my money to go, and researching the organizations that I want to give to, and how do they allocate their this, and what's their history of inclusion, and blah, blah, blah. I think that's good. I like doing that. I don't like giving money to someone and then hearing that they squander it or misappropriate it or whatever. But then also, what about giving with no idea of how it's used? Just give. Just give. We're all going to be swallowed by a big giant sun, and everything that we do will burn and become nothing. So just give. I don't know. Just offering these ideas. So then the last thing I wanted to share about how does Buddhism respond to suffering is what I sent out in an email earlier, which is the full statement offered by the Buddhist Coalition for Democracy, BCD, Buddhist Coalition for Democracy. They formed last year. It's basically the steering committee or the facilitating leaders, whatever, are kind of an amalgamation of different Buddhist lineages, mostly from the Insight tradition. There's some Vipassana people, there's one Zen guy, but it's basically in response to President 47. They really wanted to create a Buddhist, trans-Buddhist, inter-Buddhist coalition to resist the greed, anger, and ignorance that is playing a large role in our federal government and, by extension, our mainstream culture. So before I read the statement, I just want to offer one more practice in how we respond to suffering. And it's a little cliche, but I think it's really appropriate, which is, we've all heard it, be the change you want to see in the world. Which I learned is actually not a quote from Gandhi, but rather like an amalgamated kind of summary of his teachings, but it's been attributed to him. And I'm finding new power in that. Because I always took it to just mean like, you want to see a new president, then join the campaign. Or you want to end hunger, then start a food bank. But I'm realizing that there's a lot of power and something that this practice really gives us a direct gateway to, which is actually becoming that change on a day-to-day basis. So if I want to create world peace, then how do I bring peace to my household? If I want to end world hunger, then put some kind bars in your back seat. And every time you stop at the stoplight and there's a person there with a sign, give them a kind bar. If I want people to love each other, whatever the big thing is. Oh, a good one. If I want to end our oppressive carceral system, which y'all may know is like a big thing for me, if I want to abolish prison, then how do I stop punishing myself or the people around me when they make mistakes? And even though it's not going to change the country, it's not going to change the world, it's not going to change a huge institution that's been around for centuries, there's something about that, bringing that spirit to my everyday life, that just feels like an appropriate response. And I'll say a little more about that in a little bit. So what does this coalition of Buddhists say in response to the attack on Venezuela? They say, these events must be examined through the lens of right speech, nonviolence, interdependence, and the avoidance of harm born of craving, fear, and domination. So again, can we do that in our own life? With our kids, with our students, with our coworkers? Can we see it through the lens of right speech, nonviolence, interdependence, and the avoidance of harm through the three poisons? The use of military force to resolve political conflict reflects a failure of wisdom and compassion, regardless of the moral deficiencies of the targeted regime. So when do I use aggression in my life to solve political, interpersonal problems? It is ironic that the United States seeks to prosecute the president of a foreign country for alleged crimes committed while in office, while the U.S. Supreme Court has granted near absolute immunity to our president for alleged crimes committed while in office. The failure of wisdom and right speech here are amplified by the fact that Trump pardoned a former Honduran president who was similarly convicted by an American jury for the major crimes that Maduro is now accused of. This is a long statement. I'm going to read the whole thing because I think it's worth hearing how the coalition of Buddhists respond. History repeatedly shows that similar interventions deepen suffering, fracture societies, and generate karmic consequences that rebound upon both aggressor and the victimized population. If this is not something that we take into our daily lives, I don't know what else could be. If you fuck with people, it will fuck with you. Period. The capture of a leader does not dissolve the structural causes of injustice. It often hardens them and may lead to the rise of worse tyrants. In fact, the United States has intervened dozens of times in Latin America and the Caribbean, invariably to prop up right-wing dictatorships or overthrow progressives, and its gunboats have only left a wake of lasting violence, injustice, and inequality. More recently, the U.S. military adventures in Vietnam and Iraq, justified as usual with false pretexts, did not lead to any form of democracy, a product that can neither be exported nor imposed by force, shock, awe, or spectacle. How do I try to impose my way on others? In addition, the unilateral U.S. intervention in Venezuela strikes at the core of prohibitions of modern international law. Article 2.4 of the Charter of the United Nations prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, permitting exceptions only for self-defense against an armed attack or explicitly authorized by the Security Council. Venezuela poses no such armed threat to the United States, and the Security Council authorization, no authorization exists. Humanitarian justifications or claims of democratic restoration, frequently invoked in these contexts, have no settled status as lawful exceptions under the Charter. The result is not a gray zone, but a clear departure from the post-1945 legal framework that the United States itself helped to design. Such an intervention also functions as a disturbing precedent. Cuba, for example, may be in line for similar treatment, especially when Secretary of State Marco Rubio lately has been the architect of the 60-year blockade on this island nation and is believed to be behind the designs on Venezuela in order to weaken its support for Cuba and facilitate regime change. Panama has experienced forcible intervention justified ex post facto by moral and security claims, and Trump has complained about its relations with China in reference to the canal's operations. He is already threatening Colombia, from which Panama was carved by Theodore Roosevelt in 1903 because he doesn't like its leftist president. Greenland and even Canada have been openly discussed by U.S. leaders in transactional, quasi-imperial terms, and Trump has declared his intention to make them U.S. states by one way or another. The international consequences extend well beyond the Western Hemisphere. When a dominant power disregards the Charter's core restraints, it signals that those restraints are optional rather than constitutive. Other great powers will draw the lesson quickly. Just want to make sure to be good on time here. The specious legal argument is symmetrical. If spheres of influence excuse force for Washington, they excuse force for everyone else. The deeper damage is systemic. International law survives not because it is always enforced, but because major powers pretend to obey it. Open disregard, especially by its principal architect, invites a return to a world where might makes right, and where smaller states exist by sufferance rather than by law. Venezuela, in this sense, is not merely a regional crisis. It is a stress test for whether the post-war legal order still constrains those capable of violating it. We therefore call for honesty, an immediate cessation of hostilities, and transparent processes in harmony with American and international law. These wise practices should provide a multilateral path toward reconciliation, free of greed, anger, and delusion. It also talks a little bit about this American running of Venezuela. I just want to save time so we can have a discussion here. I just want to be very clear that this is not a partisan statement. This group, this Buddhist Coalition for Democracy, is very clearly made of liberals, conservatives, progressives, non-politicals, whatever. They really try to be inclusive as possible. And I really don't, when I read this, it does not seem like a partisan statement. It seems like a statement of seeing things as they are. And so I know it got kind of technical going into the charter of the UN and Security Council and things like that, but I think that's so important because our practice of not knowing, bearing witness, watching our mind, it seems so simple, but just sitting down and looking at our breath really allows us little by little to see things as they are And I really do believe that if this was a democratic or socialist president, Obama was infamous for his drone use. There were tons of statements about that, how unwise and uncompassionate that was. So I see this as just a best attempt at just explaining what is. And it is quite troubling. So that's the modern Buddhist coalition responding to the suffering that we see. And I'll just end by sharing something that I was talking to Lev White. Does everyone remember Fresh Lev, our guest speaker, good friend of the Sangha? He'll be coming back in March. Very excited to hear from him. But we were talking about New Year's and making resolutions, making resolution cards, which we did here during the mandala on New Year's Eve. And he was saying that, like, something that he's doing and he's really encouraging people to do is to just think audaciously big with your resolutions. So on his resolution card, he has, whatever, make more money, be a better friend, yada, yada, yada. And he has end world hunger. He says, see your resolutions, your visioning, whether it's New Year's, whether it's March, whether it's November, whatever you're visioning, have the audacity to vision big. Put down on your card, end all war, abolish the prison system. Because, I don't know, that to me really does encourage be the change you want to see in the world. If you have a little vision board or a vision card and every day you see end world hunger, then when you're at Aldi and you see the little protein bars, you're probably more likely to grab them and put them in your back seat. All these big things we want to see in the world: wisdom, compassion, end of hunger, end of war, world peace. We can lead by example. Some of us have bigger tools, a bigger megaphone. Some of us have a smaller sphere of influence. Can we use our ingredients to lead by example and respond appropriately to this suffering with a big S? I hope